Well, hello there, listening squirrels. My librarian and I, we talked it over. Miss Pat Dancer. We talk over the book thing. That book that I've been reading, The Old Curiosity Shop, has 73 chapters. We're only 30, just like a little over 30% finished with that book, and I'm just not into it, y'all. I was, and I wasn't. Now I know it's getting a little interesting with her but Pat says the ending is, we wouldn't like it without telling me what it is. So here's your notice, official executive decision. I'm not gonna read it anymore. I'm sorry. I hope it doesn't upset anybody. You can always read it on your own. Or if there's an audio book, because I know you'd rather listen to it read, because you want to be doing your thing. But the good news is this. We did a little digging and found out most all, if not all, Agatha Christie books are on the public domain list. When I looked before, I didn't see that. But Miss Pat did, and then I did some digging and I saw it. So, I know I started to read that Tommy and Tuppence, and we are going to get to that. What was it? I forgot. I can't remember right now. Oh, it was something like Something Wicked This Way Come. It wasn't Something Wicked. By the Pricking of My Thumb. But we're going to read. I hope it's going to be good. It's got Miss Marple in it. What Mrs. McGillicuddy Saw. And I get to read out of my book that Annette Pastel Dreams gave me on my birthday this year. Alright, this is cool because it's got the cast of characters. Let's read through the cast of characters, won't you? Elspeth, or Elspeth, I'll probably say Elspeth. It's E-L-S-P-E-T-H. McGillicuddy. She was the kind of sensible old lady who knew what she saw, and she had seen a murder. Jane Marple, a dithery, fluffy octogenarian. She was addicted to homemade wine, pots of tea, and undercover sleuthing. My mama was an octogenarian too, but she was barely just in her 80s. Lucy, Barrow, I guess. An Oxford-educated upstairs, downstairs, and in-between maid. She pampered the young, the old, habitual drunkards, and spoiled dogs with equal ease. Emma Crackenthorpe. What are these names? Almost, but not quite, an old maid. She pretended her father, Luther, was really the invalid he wanted to be. And here's Luther Crackenthorpe. The cantankerous old skinflint busied himself counting the gold sovereigns and hoping to outlive his 3 sons. Alexander Eastley, Brian's son, thought the Yorkshire pudding simply wizard, and that's in quotes. The treacle tart, good old, O-H, but considered finding a murder clue the most smashing thing of all. Dr. Quimper, the family doctor, had an offhand, cynical manner and a habit of calling even when people weren't sick. And Cedric, I had a dog named Cedric. Count Cedric Pierpont Wee Hunt Van Hoy. Well, we called him Cedric or Sid. But Cedric Krakenthorpe, a lusty bohemian painter living on an island in the Mediterranean, he had no use for women, he said. Harold Krakenthorpe, a correct city gentleman, he seemed to believe the murder was a deliberate insult to his family's honor. Sounds good already just reading this, doesn't it? Alfred Krakenthorpe, while not exactly dishonest, he was a sharp customer, so sharp he sometimes cut himself. Brian Eastley, although an ex-fighter pilot and DFC winner, what's DFC? Y'all look it up. He behaved most of the time like an unhappy little boy. And Detective Inspector Dermot, D-E-R-M-O-T, Craddock, he made a great show of presenting a small portion of the facts and implying it was the whole truth. And I actually got in here. I've been drinking water because my funky cold edema is really bad, y'all. My legs and feet are blown up like balloons. And I can't find the number to get in touch with that guy to get my $6,000 machine that's sitting in there working. I might just crack it open and there should be a card in there. This is heavy. Anyway, chapter 1. I hope you aren't mad about the other thing. I've only done that, I think, one other time. I started Wuthering Heights, and I just couldn't get through it. Although I love the movie. It was just too heavy for me. Wow, these chapters are short. Chapter 1. What Mrs. McGillicuddy Saw. And there's another book called Mrs. McGillicuddy's Dead. So I guess that'll be next, if we like this one. Mrs. McGillicuddy panted along the platform in the wake of the porter carrying her suitcase. Mrs. McGillicuddy was short and stout. The porter was tall and free-striding. In addition, Mrs. McGillicuddy was burdened with a large quantity of parcels, the result of a day's Christmas shopping. I have to redo my batteries up there again, my little ones that frame it are the change battery. Burdened with a large quantity of parcels, the result of a day's Christmas shopping. The race was therefore an uneven one, and the porter turned the corner at the end of the platform while Mrs. McGillicuddy, reminds me of Lucy, that was her maiden name, was still coming up the straight. Number 1 platform was not at the moment unduly crowded, since a train had just gone out, but in the no-man's land beyond, a milling crowd was rushing in several directions at once, to and from undergrounds, left luggage offices, tea rooms, inquiry offices, indicator boards, and the 2 outlets, arrival and departure to the outside world. Mrs. McGillicuddy and her parcels were buffeted to and fro, but she arrived eventually at the entrance to number 3 platform and deposited 1 parcel at her feet while she searched her bag for the ticket that would enable her to pass the stern uniformed guardian at the gate. I wonder, I've seen a movie where she's on a train and she sees a murder on a passing train. I wonder if this is it. Didn't have the same name. Okay, let's see. Guardian at the gate. At that moment, a voice, raucous yet refined, burst into speech over her head. The train standing at platform 3, the voice told her, is the 454 for Brackhampton, Milchester, Waverton, Carville Junction, Roxeter, and stations to Chadmouth. Passengers for Brackhampton and Milchester travel at the rear of the train. Passengers for Venaquay or Venakey change at Roxeter. The voice shut itself off with a click and then reopened conversation by announcing the arrival at Platform 9 of the 435 from Birmingham and Wolverhampton. Mrs. McGillicuddy found her ticket and presented it. The man clipped it and murmured, "On the right, rear portion." Mrs. McGillicuddy padded up the platform and found her porter looking bored and staring into space outside the door of a third-class carriage. "Here you are, lady. I'm traveling first class," said Mrs. McGillicuddy. "You didn't say so," grumbled the porter. His eye swept her masculine-looking pepper and salt tweed coat despairingly. Mrs. McGillicuddy, who had said so, did not argue the point. She was sadly out of breath. The porter retrieved the suitcase and marched with it to the adjoining... This is what was in it. This is my bookmark. Coach, where Mrs. McGillicuddy was installed in solitary splendor. The 454 was not much patronized, the first-class clientele preferring either the faster morning express or the 640 with dining cars. Mrs. McGillicuddy handed the porter his tip, which he received with disappointment, clearly considering it more applicable to third class than to first-class travel. Mrs. McGillicuddy, though prepared to spend money on comfortable travel after a night journey from the north and a day's feverish shopping, was at no time an extravagant tipper. She settled herself back on the plush cushions with a sigh and opened a magazine. 5 minutes later, whistles blew and the train started. The magazine slipped from Mrs. McGillicuddy's hand. Her head dropped sideways. 3 minutes later, she was asleep. Sounded like me. She slept for 35 minutes and awoke refreshed. Resettling her hat, which had slipped askew, she sat up and looked out of the window at what she could see of the flying countryside. It was quite dark now, a dreary, misty December day. Christmas was only 5 days ahead. London had been dark and dreary. The country was no less so, though occasionally rendered cheerful with its constant clusters of lights as the train flashed through towns and stations. "Serving last tea now," said an attendant, whisking open the corridor like a Jenny, Jinni. Mrs. McGillicuddy had already partaken of tea at a large department store. She was for the moment amply nourished. The attendant went on down the corridor, uttering his monotonous cry. With a pleased expression, Mrs. McGillicuddy looked up at the rack where her various parcels reposed. The fact towels had been F-A-C-T, towels, had been excellent value and just what Margaret wanted. The space gun for Robbie and the rabbit for Jen were highly satisfactory. And that evening coatee, like a coat, two E's, was just the thing she herself wanted, warm but dressy. The pullover for Hector, too. Her mind dwelt with approval on the soundness of her purchases. Her satisfied gaze returned to the window. A train traveling in the opposite direction rushed by with a screech, making the windows rattle and causing her to start. The train clattered over points and passed through a station. Then it began suddenly to slow down, presumably in obedience to a signal. For some minutes it crawled along and then stopped. Presently it began to move forward again. Another up train passed them, though with less vehemence than the first one. The train gathered speed again. At that moment another train, also on a down line, swerved inward toward them. For a moment, with almost alarming effect. For a time the two trains ran parallel, now one gaining a little, now the other. Mrs. McGillicuddy looked from her window through the windows of the parallel carriages. Most of the blinds were drawn, but occasionally the occupants of the carriages were visible. I bet it is. I wonder what it was called. I know it wasn't this. The other train was not very full, and there were many empty carriages. At the moment when the At at the moment when the two trains gave the illusion of being stationary, a blind in one of the carriages flew up with a snap. Mrs. McGillicuddy looked into the lighted first-class carriage that was only a few feet away. Then she drew her breath in with a gasp and half rose to her feet. Standing with his back to the window to her was a man. His hands were round the throat of a woman who faced him, and he was slowly, remorselessly strangling her. Her eyes were starting from their sockets. Her face was purple and congested. As Mrs. McGillicuddy watched, fascinated, the end came. The body went limp and crumpled in the man's hands. At the same moment, Mrs. McGillicuddy's train slowed down again, and the other began to gain speed. It passed forward, and a moment or two later it had vanished from sight. Almost automatically, Mrs. McGillicuddy's hand went up to the communication cord, then paused, irresolute. After all, what use would it be ringing the cord of the train in which she was traveling? The horror of what she had seen at such close quarters and the unusual circumstances made her feel paralyzed. Some immediate action was necessary, but what? The door of her compartment was drawn back, and a ticket collector said, "Ticket, please." Mrs. McGillicuddy turned to him with vehemence. "A woman has been strangled," she said, "in a train that just passed. I saw it." The ticket collector looked at her doubtfully. "I beg your pardon, madam?" "A man strangled a woman in a train. I saw it through there." She pointed to the window. The ticket collector looked extremely doubtful. "Strangled?" he said disbelievingly. "Yes, strangled. I saw it. I tell you, you must do something at once." The ticket collector coughed apologetically. You don't think, madam, that you may have had a little nap and he broke off tactfully. "I have had a nap, but if you think this was a dream, you're quite wrong. I saw it, I tell you." The ticket collector's eyes dropped to the open magazine lying on the seat. On the exposed page was a girl being strangled while a man with a revolver threatened the pair from an open doorway. He said persuasively, "Now don't you think, madam, that you've been reading an exciting story and you just dropped off and awakening a little confused?" Mrs. McGillicuddy interrupted him. "I saw it," she said. "I was as wide awake as you are, and I looked out of the window into the window of the train alongside, and a man was strangling a woman. And what I want to know is, what are you going to do about it?" "Well, madam, you're going to do something, I suppose." The ticket collector sighed reluctantly and glanced at his watch. "We shall be in Brackhampton in exactly 7 minutes. I'll report what you've told me. In what direction was the train you mentioned going?" "This direction, of course. You don't suppose I've been able to see all this if a train had flashed past going in the other direction?" The ticket collector looked as though he thought Mrs. McGillicuddy was quite capable of seeing anything anywhere as the fancy took her, but he remained polite. "You can rely on me, madam," he said. "I will report your statement. Perhaps I might have your name and address, just in case." Mrs. McGillicuddy gave him the address where she would be staying for the next few days, and her permanent address in Scotland, and he wrote them down. Then he withdrew with the air of a man who has done his duty and dealt successfully with a tiresome member of the traveling public. Mrs. McGillicuddy remained frowning and vaguely unsatisfied. Would the ticket collector really report her statement, or had he just been soothing her? There were, she stopped vaguely, a lot of elderly women traveling around, fully convinced that they had unmasked communist plots, were in danger of being murdered, saw flying saucers and secret spaceships, and reported murders that had never taken place. If the man dismissed her as one of those. The train was slowing down now, passing over points and running through the bright lights of a large town. Mrs. McGillicuddy opened her handbag, pulled out a receipted bill, which was all she could find, wrote a rapid note on the back of it with a ballpoint pen, put it into a spare envelope that she fortunately happened to have, stuck the envelope down and wrote on it. The train drew slowly into a crowded platform. The usual ubiquitous voice was intoning, "The train now arriving at platform 1 is the 5:38 for Milchester, Waverton, Roxerton, and stations to Chadmouth. Passengers for Market Basing take the train now waiting at number 3 platform. Number 1 bay for stopping train to Carberry." Mrs. McGillicuddy looked anxiously along the platform. So many passengers and so few porters. Ah, there was one. She held him authoritatively. "Porter, please take this at once to the station master's office." She handed him the envelope and with it a shilling. Then with a sigh she leaned back. Well, she had done what she could. Her mind lingered with an instant's regret on the shilling. 6 pence would really have been enough. Her mind went back to the scene she had witnessed. Horrible, quite horrible. She was a strong-nerved woman, but she shivered. What a strange, what a fantastic thing to happen to her. Elspeth McGillicuddy. If the blind of the carriage had not happened to fly up, but that, of course, was Providence. Providence had willed that she, Elspeth McGillicuddy, should be a witness of the murder. Her lips set grimly. Voices shouted, whistles blew, doors were banged shut. The 5:38 drew slowly out of Brackhampton station. An hour and 5 minutes later it stopped at Milchester. Mrs. McGillicuddy collected her parcels and her suitcase and got out. She peered up and down the platform. Her mind reiterated its former judgment. Not enough porters. Such porters as there were seemed to be engaged with mailbags and luggage vans. Passengers nowadays seemed always expected to carry their own cases. Well, she couldn't carry her suitcase and her umbrella and all her parcels. She would have to wait. In due course, she secured a porter. "Taxi? There will be something to meet me, I expect." Outside Milchester station, a taxi driver who had been watching the exit came forward. He spoke in a soft local voice. "Is it Mrs. McGillicuddy for St. Mary Mead?" Mrs. McGillicuddy acknowledged her identity. And was St. Mary Mead in the Vicar book? Anyway, Mrs. McGillicuddy acknowledged her identity. The porter was recompensed adequately, if not handsomely. The car with Mrs. McGillicuddy, but her suitcase and her parcels drove off into the night. It was a 9-mile drive. Sitting bolt upright in the car, Mrs. McGillicuddy was unable to relax. Her feelings yearned for expression. At last the taxi drove along the familiar village street and finally drew up at its destination. Mrs. McGillicuddy got out and walked up the brick path to the door. The driver deposited the cases inside as the door was opened by an elderly maid. Mrs. McGillicuddy passed straight through the hall to where, at the open sitting room, her hostess awaited her, an elderly, frail old lady. "Elspeth! Jane!" Oh, Elspeth is it's Marple's Jane. They kissed, and without preamble or circumlocution, Mrs. McGillicuddy burst into speech. "Oh, Jane," she wailed, "I've just seen a murder." Wait a minute. Oh, oh yeah, that's Mrs. McGillicuddy. No, I was thinking that was in the movie. It was Miss Marple who saw it. I guess that's why I got all mixed up. And then we're at chapter 2, and I know that wasn't a lot, but I'm going to see if my little sis, the crotchety clogger's on. It being Thursday after 4, and she should have come on at 4. That's what that alarm was. She's at Dory's house. Dory did it! I hope y'all aren't upset with me about stopping the other one. I just feel like, especially if the endings, Miss Pat said we wouldn't like the ending, so I wasn't really enjoying it. Like I say, it kind of came and went. It was kind of getting a little, I mean, I hated the grandfather was getting into gambling and stuff again when they don't have a pot to pee in. But, you know, him slinking around, that was kind of scary and stuff. So, if you want to, you know, you can always, if you've got Audible or whatever, listen to it. If not, you'll have to read it, I guess. Love y'all. Be sweet, don't be ugly. And I hope you like this one. I think we will. See ya. Bye.